Hello and welcome to this Institute for Strategic Leadership Business Forum. I'm Andrew Patterson. In our previous series, we shared with you insights from a range of CEOs dealing with the shift from business as usual to leadership in a crisis. In this new series, which we're calling Navigating New Seas, we want to examine a range of issues that now confront CEOs, including planning in an age of uncertainty, rethinking past strategies within a new operating paradigm, practical issues such as continuation of work from home arrangements, and most importantly, the mindset required to push ahead when so much around us is changing. As always, we'll be taking your questions from our online audience. I'll tell you how we can do that shortly. But first, let me introduce our three panelists joining us today. Firstly, Judy Slatyer is CEO at Australian Red Cross. Judy joined Australian Red Cross after 7 years as global CEO for the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. It operates obviously in 100 countries. For that, Judy was CEO of Lonely Planet Publications for 6 years, of course, the world's leading travel publisher with around 400 staff and 350 freelance writers. In her last year, Judy supported the sale of Lonely Planet to BBC Worldwide. Judy has also worked in the Australian government across a number of portfolios, including industrial relations, transport, communications, finance, childcare, and social security, including advising ministers. Judy, welcome to you, joining us from Australia. Also with us from Singapore, Lim Teck Yin, appointed to Sports Singapore as CEO in 2011. Prior to that, he had 30 years of command and staff assignments in the Singapore Armed Forces, where he contributed to the strategic visioning and planning of the force, leading and managing units, operations and projects, and developing people and multidisciplinary teams. Teck Yin, welcome to you. Finally, with us too, we have Gareth Lorigan, ISL's Program Director. Gareth has been with ISL, of course, for 6 years, Program Director for the last 2 on both of the Institute's Strategic Leadership Program and the Step Up Leadership Program, with over 40 programs of experience. He's, of course, seen hundreds of individual leadership journeys and teams developed through ISL's post-program workshop offerings. Welcome to you all. Just before we begin, a quick message for our online audience. We do welcome and encourage your questions, which we'll take at the end of this forum. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, just post it straight onto the YouTube chat. Questions you ask here will be passed on to the panel in the final part of the forum. As I mentioned, we're really keen to hear from as many of you as possible, so don't be shy in asking your questions. All right, let's begin, as we have traditionally in previous forums, by taking a look at the latest ISL Leader Pulse. Gareth, can you share with us the latest data? What's it telling us?
Yeah, well, we've been measuring leadership for some period, especially over the last 8 to 10 weeks, and we measure teams quite regularly inside their industry and organizations, and we're finding some amazing statistics that are coming out. And what's really amazing is that people are really happy with their leadership at the moment. They're vibing with their leaders. They're really feeling supported. Equally amazing is that the parts of the engagement survey, we're finding that parts of those teams are either ambivalent or scoring as disengaged, which is really interesting and leading us to correlate and relate to the low engagement, low mojo scores in these teams. So mojo is still a really big topic as we've moved through this series of measurement. The question remains is, are these personal factors? There's uncertainty in families, there's health-related topics, there's employment-related issues, or are they work-related? What's happening in the workplace as uncertainty kind of takes its toll. The challenge for leaders now is, how are they measuring and how are they supporting teams through the uncertainty, and what are they going to do to boost the mojo of the teams? It's a really important part of the next phase. It's been a long journey so far, and there's still a long journey to go. How are these leaders supporting, engaging, and boosting the mojo of their teams is a really important factor at the moment, Andrew.
I think we've got some data to share, which actually just shows some of those shifts that have been occurring. I think we've got that data there, hopefully. Do you want to talk us through some of the specific points, particularly around the mojo?
Yeah, look, I think 3 or 4 weeks into this process, I heard a leader say that it felt like we were halfway through the epidemic, but we're only a few weeks into it, and it's like the first kilometre of a marathon. There's still lots of kilometres to go. So even 5 or 6 weeks after that comment, we're noticing that people are now tired. I was talking to Judy offline, and she mentioned that she took a break last week, which was the first time since well before Christmas. So people are running hot, they're running fast, they're getting tired, and an opportunity to take some break and restore mojo is a really important factor at the moment.
When we look at that decline in mojo, perhaps not surprising, as you say, given this is now this is a marathon, which is obviously taking some time. But what are your thoughts around how to deal with that as it continues to fall away?
Yeah, look, it's a complex environment in boosting mojo and engagement. I think it's important for leaders to be considering individuals as in their direct leadership portfolio inside their team, making sure that they've got all the tools and resources they need. Are they taking a rest? Are they taking time out? How are they connecting with family and supporting family? So it's a pretty dynamic space. It's really bringing to light pure leadership, which is around taking care of the people that report into you and supporting them, and also the stakeholders that report into those teams, the customers, the benefactors of the services that they provide. So it's very important that they get on top of this and keep measuring it, and keep pulsing their teams to make sure that they're in a good state of mind. But mojo is an important factor, and like we said, we can see a direct correlation to engagement in teams. And the engagement has all these knock-on effects into client and staff satisfaction. So it's a very, very important topic.
Well, let's hear from our two CEOs how they are dealing with mojo. Judy, first to you, and you might just unmute yourself there. How are you dealing personally with yourself? How are you feeling? You've had the bushfire crisis followed by COVID almost back to back, which probably accounts for why you haven't been able to have much of a break. But how are you personally feeling at this stage, and also some of the aspects you've seen from your teams as well?
Yes, so in the very near future, in the next months, will be a year since fires started, even though obviously the crescendo of fires was around Christmas, New Year, and that was on top of a drought. So we've been really going very hard for a long time. We've worked really diligently on making sure we're being flexible, adaptable, giving people space, clearing the decks to really prioritise and focus and allow people to focus. And Red Cross people across the board have just been remarkable. In terms of myself, we have what we call the Velvet Hammer, which is anyone can get donged with the Velvet Hammer, and it's run by our HR team, and it basically says, you need to have these 2 days off, and it's just not negotiable. So it's all worked through, and we run that across the organisation as best as we can. Having said that, fatigue is still a major issue for us at the moment, but obviously also looking after my health, making sure I've got time for family, giving myself permission to be flexible and adaptable, but at the same time being there for anyone in Red Cross who needs a listening ear or a shoulder to not cry on but be relied on. So no, it's been a real mix. I have to say, at the moment, after having the benefit of a full week off and completely disconnected, I'm just incredibly proud of what we've achieved, but I am conscious that we need to figure out how to manage fatigue across the organisation.
Let's come back to that, but I do like the idea of the Velvet Hammer, because an organisation like Red Cross, you're a support organisation. You draw on people who have high levels of empathy and really want to give 150% every day, and sometimes they just burn themselves out, don't they? All right, let's pick up. We'll come back to that. Let's pick up from you and take a perspective from Singapore as well too. Declan, what are you seeing from your perspective? I guess particularly from your own mojo and your team's mojo, and of course Singapore, as we know, as a country, is very good at coming together behind a national cause. So in many ways, COVID sometimes almost plays to the strengths that Singapore has in abundance in this space. But how are you feeling, and how are you managing your team at the moment?
Well, I would say that everything that we had previously been doing for organizational and leader development continues unabated. We have many of our leaders undergoing training and participating in courses. Senior management itself is going through a program run by an outfit called Well Coaches that is certifying us to be health and wellness coaches because we are piloting a scalable program with the public service where wellness has become an important pillar of public service transformation. And I find that continuing to learn and to be trained and to be coached during this period has had a massive effect on leaders' well-being, because it certainly emphasizes the point that we can only be effective if we can show up well. But I think in the larger scheme of things, the whole organization has pivoted its work to be able to support a national effort to deal with this crisis. And so we have sports centers that have been repurposed as quarantine centers, and my staff on the front lines are helping to run those operations. We have attached different pockets of staff to different ministries who have responsibilities in COVID-19. Some are out as safe distancing ambassadors in the community. Others are manning hotlines. Others are helping families who are in need. We have a volunteer movement that's out there that's mobilizing sport volunteers to do everything from mass distribution exercises in the community to helping with engagement programs across a range of audiences. There are people who are holed up in hotels on stay-home notices, and they are being supported with Zumba programs from their balconies, care packs. Our recreation club has been activated to be responsible for demonstrating care, and they've been organizing parent programs for those staff who've got little kids at home. And so they do live activities for all the families who want to sign up to those programs. Things that we have been typically doing for our community customers, we're now providing to our staff as well.
That's great. Let's turn now to, I guess, thinking from a global perspective from all of this, some of the issues that are front in mind for you from a global perspective, perhaps some insights that you can share around innovation or ideas that you have developed, and particularly, obviously, I guess, COVID is always going to be remembered as the event that moved us in the digital space as well too. Judy, some thoughts around the global perspectives and areas that you can share perhaps?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So we've been part of the Red Cross, Red Crescent family who exist in 190 countries around the world. And in about 160 of those countries, the Red Cross or the Red Crescent organisation is front and centre with governments in the national response. And we are included in that. So very significantly, hundreds of thousands of calls to Australians in isolation and quarantine, ensuring distribution of food, ensuring people logistically are okay, making sure those who are falling through the cracks are supported. And what was important to us was to be able to pivot fast globally in many, many different languages across the world. And how do we learn from each other? Because with the nature of the pandemic, obviously Britain and Italy and those places and China were learning much faster than we were. And so how did we make sure globally the rest of the world also had that very active joint shared learning so that we could really hit the ground running when COVID started to take off in our various countries? So we've been having, obviously, Zoom, so very regular Zoom sessions, global sessions each week, but then also experimenting with how do we share the innovations, how do we share the approaches in a way that is non-language specific. So we've been using New York Times cartoonists to attend those sessions and draw the initiatives so that they can be instantly shared and everybody can pick them up without the worry about the many, many different languages that we normally have to worry about. Because as is always the case, the best innovations on how to respond to something like this and how to pivot and how to shift often come from the smallest places or the most remote corners. So we've had fantastic learnings from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from China. China's been terrific. China Red Cross has been terrific in sharing their very, very early learnings on how to approach it. And it's just been a wonderful way to innovate and pivot very quickly. More focused on Australia, we've also had to shift our whole organisation, as everybody has had to do, to be able to deliver and support community through the times. So the demand was increasing, but at the same time, every single one of our traditional means had to be changed. So a couple of examples. We work with youth in youth detention as they are due to be released to prepare them and their families for coming back into society and re-participating in society. Normally that's a very physical thing with visits and exchanges and coaching sessions. Obviously that couldn't work. In fact, we weren't even allowed into the jails or the detention centres, nor the families. So we've been experimenting with virtual reality on how to help young people imagine leaving detention, start to imagine, embrace the behaviours and things that they want to, the goals that they have set themselves. Similarly, we had in early April, not many people will know this, but there was a really significant tropical cyclone Harold in the Pacific, which impacted hundreds of thousands of people in Vanuatu in Fiji, and normally would be occupying the news, but obviously in times of COVID it wasn't. So we collectively with our Pacific Red Cross peers had to rapidly change our approach to get supplies and activities going in response to the cyclone, which was a really significant event, obviously working with government on that too. But digital has perhaps been the most where we have fundamentally shifted, and in a way that we will never ever go back from. So it's been fantastic in enabling much greater reach of our services. For example, in Coffs Harbour, we have a refugee program for families to help them settle in the area. It's normally located around a single house with lots of activities and things. Obviously, that all had to go online, and now it's much more available. All the fantastic initiatives that they do to help people settle in Australia and start to build their lives in Australia is now available to anyone who wishes to participate in it wherever they are. So just a few small examples, but it's been profound and really inspiring, actually, watching the whole of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement across the world collectively pivot and share and learn from each other in really imaginative ways.
Thanks, Judy. And I really like that idea of the cartoonist. I've seen that done at conferences. It's a very effective way, and particularly, as you say, when you're dealing with a global base of staff and teams, that language isn't always a universal language with English, but cartoons and visuals can be really effective. So, really good initiative. Declan, how have you approached, I guess, from a global perspective? Singapore, of course, as we know, a very global city state, and you've had issues around supply chains, and I imagine all kinds of things that you've been dealing with as well too. What are some insights that you can share with us?
Well, certainly as a globally connected economy, it's been very important that Singapore proactively participates in any initiatives that promote the continuing operations of global supply chains. It's not just for essentials like food, but also for supplies that enable businesses to continue to run. On a consumer front, having these supply chains open has been very important to allowing both individuals as well as companies to pivot. From a simple perspective of where you're going to get your computer supplies and food, to how your businesses are starting to continue to deliver services. And I think being able to stay open has been a major effort on the part of the government. One of the things that we have seen during this time is an acceleration of industry transformation. Obviously, there's a whole part of that relates to being able to build digital capabilities, but training has also become very, very important. And to be able to use, to a certain extent, the downtime in some industries to raise the capability of the workforce. And so what the Singapore government has done is to provide allowances for people to attend training while providing salary relief for employers that will enable them to stay employed and attend training programs. So I think that has been a very important part of the overall strategy to be able to uplift the nation at this time. But in crisis situations, I think what has been an important mindset amongst leaders and organizations is that we have to look for opportunities. And certainly for sport, the opportunity to start to look at delivering services online, activating new revenue streams, rethinking sport events and how those get delivered has all become a very important part of the conversations that we're now having. And a big part of this has been the way we think about data and how we would begin to share data to be able to drive the kind of innovation we want to see. Singapore has invited an organization called the Global Sport Innovation Center to establish a satellite for Asia in Singapore. They were supposed to be physically present on the ground in July, but as the world becomes more connected digitally, while they're not able to be physically here, they will open as planned, but virtually. And all the initiatives that they have in mind to cut across all manner of innovation and to bring that innovation to sport is continuing, and some exciting possibilities ahead.
I understand that if you want certain items of gym equipment in Singapore at the moment, you're all so keen on fitness and exercise that you don't run out, so you can't find any.
Well, that's linked to the global supply chain. A lot of these supplies will come up from China, and what the government has recently done is to put in place some green lane arrangements, both for business travelers, as well as to ensure that much of these supplies that are coming from factories overseas will find their way here. So while there was an initial blip in that and some fitness equipment sort of sold out, I think the major retailers like the big chains like Decathlon have been able to run their warehousing and home delivery services unabated, and are seeing indeed a big spike in online sales. The CEO of the company told me that they've met all their growth targets several years ahead. And they're rethinking how they're going to run these operations going forward beyond COVID, because they think that online sales are the way to go.
The great thing about being CEO for Sport Singapore is you don't have to worry about your staff being unfit, do you?
Well, on the contrary, we have a hiring policy that basically hires anybody who wants to work in Sports Singapore, whether they are sporty or not. And the big idea there is that if we're promoting sport to the rest of Singapore, then let us have an organization that looks like Singapore. And if we can convince our staff, we know what we need to do for the rest of the population.
Good point. Gareth, thoughts on global perspectives, and particularly as somebody who is talking with multiple CEOs and C-suite executives, anything else you want to add to that part of the discussion?
Well, I think interesting that Teck was talking before about online fitness classes, and that they've never had them before, and they've now got 300 people. Similarly, at the Institute, we've had to move three years of R&D into a few months to be able to deliver our services online. Traditionally, we do it in person, but that innovation's created things like this Leader Forum, where we can get leaders together from the region and have a great conversation, but also deliver products online. So the virtual communication is really important. So shifting the technology for us, but even for Judy at Red Cross and Teck, has been a huge shift in and around being able to pivot and meet the needs of our stakeholders and clients, and engagement's been really, really important. But I'd agree also with the supply chain. There's some emerging issues with supply chain and getting products, and it's going to have an impact on retailers. There's going to be a lot of knock-on effects in the next few months and into next year. I think it's going to have a pretty big impact for all of us.
Let's move to this next part of the forum I'm interested to touch on, which is the fact that you both, Judy and Teck, represent organisations that work towards building and inspiring communities. But obviously, as a result of COVID, the social fabric has been impacted. What role has leadership played in helping your respective organisations continue to build and impact the community? And Judy, you've alluded to this. I mean, this is right at the heart of what Red Cross does. What are some of the leadership insights and perhaps examples from some of your team that have stood out for you, and perhaps some areas that you can share in that space?
So let me start with a story, actually, and it relates a bit to sports. So it relates to the Football Federation of Australia. And very, very early in the pandemic response, obviously local sporting clubs had to close down, which was incredibly sad because, as I'm sure my panel members know, local sporting clubs and initiatives are actually a really critical part of the social fabric in which many, many people participate, many people connect. They feel included, they feel part of something, they have an identity. So we reached out to the Football Federation of Australia, who had to stand down all of their community sports initiatives in a physical sense, to say who wants to get involved in some volunteering instead, recognising that volunteering would still be digital and not physical engagement, but you'll be part of something, you'll be part of a bigger national response to COVID. And really, really, really well received. We then extended that to 9 other corporates who had to lay off significant numbers of staff. So while they might not be paid roles, we basically worked with 9 corporates and the Football Federation of Australia to say, who have you stood down? Who would you like to offer to participate in the nation's response to COVID? Whether it's supporting meals, whether it's driving people to appointments, whether it's making calls to those isolated and in quarantine, whether it's being what we call a digital advocate, which is sharing information about COVID health information, or whether it was part of translating all of our work into 18 different languages so that all Australians could actually understand what was going on with COVID and all the messaging. And we've had a tremendous response, and it just shows how galvanising COVID has been for the nation. And not only have we seen through this leadership of engaging and connecting with those organisations that otherwise might have staff or groups who became more disconnected, we've also seen Australians just rallying together spontaneously, innovatively, in thousands of different ways to support people in their street, to support their neighbours, to support their communities, to support each other online. Millions of acts of kindness to help each other through this, which I just think has been tremendous. And it was a really good response, actually, because when it first started, COVID led to some pretty nasty racial dynamics in some communities. And this shift by the community to be one of support, engaging, connecting, volunteering, excuse me, just completely overtook it. So our leadership has been around enabling, connecting, showing people opportunities to participate, something like the digital advocates, training people. So back to the point on training, we've had to rapidly change our volunteer onboarding to make sure that we can get people trained well, but at the same time make sure that they can be out there supporting their community through COVID very, very fast. So it's been an area that's been tremendously exciting for us to see how the Australian community has responded. I should say we saw this also in the Black Summer fires. So we've now done research with Swinburne University to assess what was the community response to the fires. And about 40% of the entire response was all community, completely self-activated, often in many country towns supported by the Red Cross. And just that ability for communities to come together in the toughest of time and create that cohesive response is absolutely critical and really important for a faster recovery. So no, in terms of leadership around community engagement, it's only been positive and really shown different ways to engage and different cohorts to engage.
And obviously very motivating for you as a CEO.
Yes, yes. So and challenge us to say, how do we train people in psychological first aid in a way that really works and is successful, but in a way that is also short? And how do we embed in them the Red Cross principles of neutrality and impartiality in our humanitarian responses, so that we're very inclusive? So all of these sorts of things that would normally take us several weeks and time, we were able to, with the support of some pro bono process design, really truncate it, but still make it effective.
Thanks for that, Judy. Teck, in your case, I guess particularly, what have been some of the challenges that you've faced around your own leadership, and perhaps aspects of that you will might change for yourself going forward?
Well, I think within a week of being hit by this crisis, we had to very quickly reorientate our work plans. First, to reconsider how we would be continuing with the work that we were doing and how services would be delivered, but also to redirect a lot of our budgets towards supporting the industry. A large part of our industry doesn't just consist of companies, but also a lot of freelancers in the gig economy that support these companies and support us. And we had to create immediately 500 jobs to be able to take on these freelancers who were displaced from their physical activities, and to come on board with us and to work with us to see how we would contribute to the overall national COVID effort. And so some of them have come online to deliver programs, but others are out there volunteering and supporting activities in areas which they were not usually doing. So some of our sports centers, as I said, have been used for quarantine centers, and some of these fitness instructors are indeed working in those operations. But faced with any crisis, I think an organization gets back to looking at its purpose, its vision, its values, to consider how it remains relevant to the situation of the day. And in that regard, we recognize that we are continuing to promote physical activity and sport, and to help people understand how they could do that safely in their homes, as well as when they venture out into the parks with certain restrictive measures in place. But also, to make sport relevant, we have to participate in a national health effort. Sport volunteers have been mobilized to help in all these other national efforts, whether it's community distribution of food, of masks, to help with the elderly. Team Singapore athletes have initiated on their own efforts to put computers in the hands of students who don't have one. So the moment home-based learning kicked in, what sort of surfaced was there was actually still a small group of families and students who, in this day and age, don't have a computer at home to be able to support that. And so, in partnership with technology companies that were willing to refurbish old laptops, we went about on laptop collection, refurbishing those laptops, standing up one sports center for the engineers from the company to work on, and then having athletes distribute these to students at home, and then continue in the relationship by mentoring these students. Obviously, if you don't have a computer at home today, it also means that there are other social issues that the family is facing with. And so having that sort of mentoring relationship was important. But it's just one of the ways in which we are able to ask ourselves, how are we relevant? And an athlete that in the past anchored his or her relevance in podium success and building a fan base now says, how can I make a meaningful difference to your life? And I think that has been an important part of the response.
And that definitely has been the silver lining for COVID, hasn't it? It's just made us all feel a little bit more empathetic in the way that we think of others. I wondered, Teck, in your own armed forces training, how that had perhaps helped your leadership style, because we know within military environments you're used to having to plan and deal in uncertain environments. Did you find that training gave you perhaps a bit of advantage?
Well, I wouldn't say it just given me an advantage, but I have a significant number of ex-armed forces personnel who work in my organization. So to be able to stand up operations of a dormitory for people who are in quarantine, I've been able to leverage on the command and control organization and practices that many of them have experience with. But I think a very important part of the mindset has been always to understand the larger intent, and then to be able to allow people armed with that intent to take initiative. And I think that has been very important. Agility at this time has been a very important characteristic, and that agility is only going to be able to come if teams on the ground, led well, able to work across teams, can bring good to bear. And I think that's been a very important part of how we've been able to operate at this time.
Just before
Andrew, could I just pick up on a few of those points, because I think they're really, really valid. And the three ones that really resonate with me are, what is our relevance in this time, and how does that relevance continue into the future? And I think looking back on our response, that was actually the very first thing we did as a leadership group and with the board. We said, through these next months, what is the most important role we want to be playing, and how do we play that to the best of our ability, and what needs to be pushed aside in order to enable that and support that, recognising nobody had all the answers of where COVID was going to go and what the impacts were. So it needed to be broad enough to be adaptable and flexible, but at the same time, how are we most relevant to supporting Australians through this? The second, I want to come back to the point on training. So we've probably done more training, I think, as Gareth mentioned, in the last few months than we've done in any short period, whether it's enabling all of our people to be online and to work from home, whether it's supporting those taking calls from temporary visa holders who are very, very stressed and distressed and in really difficult times. So helping people through engagement with those facing serious trauma when you're not physically with them, and how to navigate that, or whether it's back to how do you do a disaster response such as Cyclone Harold in a time of COVID, and where can we learn? And the third one is very much around partnerships, as you were mentioning before. The recognizing that the best way to have relevance is to scale what was possible, and to do that with partnerships and with others. And so I think they're probably been the three main things for us. Where are we most relevant to have the most significant impact? How do we rapidly train and build capacity and capability in all respects? And how do we partner to achieve more, but not overextend ourselves and use the capabilities of others?
Great, thanks, Judy. Let's just conclude by taking some questions. I think if we have any questions that have come through from our audience today, and a chance to have some input. So, Slatyer, is any questions to add from our audience at this stage? We'll come back to those in just a tick. Maybe just while we're getting the questions up, if perhaps our two CEOs might share with us, from your own leadership experience, what you might consider something that has surprised you about the way you've responded to a situation, or some that may have changed as a result of COVID. Just briefly, any aspects of your leadership that have surprised you, or that you have changed as a result? Judy.
Oh, wow. I don't think anything surprised me, but it was what was mentioned before about reconnecting with values and what's most important, and using that as the core from which to make decisions and act. And I think that's enabled me to feel very comfortable about moving quickly and navigating that quick move. And so those core values, those core principles that are part of every organisation, that are part of yourself as a person, have given me a great secure base actually on which to make decisions. And I've had fantastic people around me supporting me, really great support from the board and others, an amazing team who I'm part of. But I mean, I think the thing that was perhaps most unexpected was just how far the tentacles of COVID went. So how all that had been assumed, it just disappeared, or the tentacles reached into places that you didn't expect them to reach into. So having insurance coverage cancelled on certain activities, or having Australia Post not able to achieve what Australia Post might normally do for us through no fault of their own. And so it was being able to handle those tentacles that you just didn't expect, and to do that based on a secure base of the values, the organisational purpose, and its relevance in this time.
Thanks, Judy. Teck, any surprises, any aspect of your leadership that surprised you, or something you might have changed as a result of managing your way through COVID so far?
I think because everybody is adjusting, and as a leader yourself, you're having to adjust to new situations, and therefore seeing that your own emotions are being triggered in certain ways that you did not expect. What sort of became more important for me was to be able to accept that self-care, self-compassion, and a lot more practice of being mindful was going to be an important part of leadership capacity if you were going to show up well for your other leaders and for your staff. If you're not in a good state of mind, if messages that are coming through on the phone, through emails, are interpreted in different ways because you're not having enough conversations, you can quickly find yourself getting into your dark side. And I think what has been very useful for me, participating in a training program that's really focused on developing our coaching capacities, is to recognize that we need to practice a certain amount of self-care, self-compassion, in order to be able to show up well every day.
Really good point, because obviously as leaders, you know, the whole team, you set the tone for the team, don't you? So you know, self-care, as we've spoken about in previous forums, and things like mindfulness are going to become increasingly important. Great question from our audience, which we can use to conclude with, because I think it draws together you know, many aspects of this discussion. I'll be interested in your perspective. How prepared are we as communities for what could be a very long haul? Judy, this plays front and center into your area, because you know, Red Cross is an organization known for, you know, its work within communities, but also building communities. But there's a really, really good point about our community centeredness, I guess, if I could frame it like that.
Yes, so this is a cornerstone of what we work on, is communities' readiness, preparedness, nations' readiness, preparedness, not just for things like the pandemic, but for the increasing intensity and frequency of natural disasters which are coming our way and are very well forecast. If you look at the World Economic Forum Global Risk Register, you know, the top 1, 2, 3 risks are natural disasters, climate change related activities, etc. So it's a long conversation. The bottom line is, we as a community and as Australians need to work with urgency to prepare more cohesive communities, to have more trusted institutions, to have a stronger basis on which we all are prepared for an environment which will become more and more turbulent. And in Australia, when you looked at the bushfires, the impact on the specific areas, the impact of the smoke in the cities, if you then look at the COVID impact and all of the overlays on top of drought and on top of potential floods more recently, these are the sorts of environments we will be, as a community and as a nation, needing to be ready for. So we work very closely with governments and the Australian Business Roundtable on disaster preparedness and safer communities, and it is the cornerstone of where we will be focusing our attention into the future, because we recently, as part of the Australian Business Roundtable on disaster readiness, did an assessment by Deloitte Access Economic, which was an economic assessment, but essentially currently Australia spends around 16 billion a year responding to and recovering from disasters, and that's forecast to get to about 40 billion a year. And that did not take into account climate change. That was just related to changing population demographics, aging infrastructure, etc. If you overlay climate change, the impacts are significant. And we've seen them. We've seen the impact of heat waves. We've seen the impact of smoke. We've seen the impact of bushfires, the impact of COVID, and there are social as well as economic. So this is something I could obviously spend many, many hours talking about. There are clear plans on what it needs to take for organisations and communities and countries to be prepared and to be better prepared.
Thanks, Judy. And Teck, if we take community in its broadest sense, I mean, businesses and any organisation is a community in itself, isn't it?
That's right. You know, when I was contemplating your question, I think back that Singapore, since independence, has always had to anchor self-belief, a belief that in spite of all the circumstances that you're thrust into, that you can adapt and you can emerge stronger. And I think that self-belief continues today to help this country believe that we would indeed emerge stronger, no matter how challenging the road ahead may be. Now, that sort of rhetoric is well and good, but what you then need to be able to do is hunker down and deal with the very specific immediate challenges so that you can indeed emerge stronger in the long term. And for the government in Singapore, one of the key priorities has been about protecting jobs and creating jobs. So there is a ministerial task force that has been tasked to create 100,000 jobs in the short term. And the public service, as well as the private sector, is working closely in hand with the unions to be able to generate those jobs and create a necessary optimism, if you like, amongst the population. When we think about that from the national level, then to organizations and companies, I think we do believe that everybody can indeed pivot. Some types of jobs and some types of organizations may well not survive this situation, but the people themselves will be able to find space in the new economy, in the new normal. And that's where training, again, is going to be very important. So training institutions, centers of excellence and innovation, continuing to adapt to what's becoming more relevant to the world, are hallmarks of Singapore up to this point and will continue to be into the future. So how prepared are we? I think we must believe that we are prepared.
Thanks, Teck. And Gareth, final word to you. This is a really interesting perspective for C-suite executives to be thinking about, isn't it? That they are leading organizations, but they're also leading communities as well. And as we move through COVID, as others have alluded to, we're going to have to be more centered around the fact that we are part of communities. That's really all that's going to be able to sustain us through. What are some of the thoughts in that area about ways CEOs can think about themselves as leaders of communities?
Yeah, I think, Andrew, what it does is puts leadership in the spotlight. Like the things that I've been hearing on this forum and many of the other forums is around things like quality of communication, what's happening in their teams, how people are responding. These aren't management topics. These are leadership topics. These are about real humans and real people, about, like Judy's highlighted, there's future crises on the horizon. What they look like, we don't know. And how prepared are we? And it starts with leadership. How well are we performing? How well do we know ourselves? What's our mojo look like? How's our team performing? How are we supporting them? There's great initiatives that are happening right across the communities, like engagement with neighbours and people in the street. People, whether they want to believe it or not, are all in leadership roles, and they need to do the best that they can, lead across their community, their organisation. And even if you're not the leader, how you're supporting the leadership and how you're supporting your peers is an often overlooked item in a leadership space. So, it's an interesting time.
Indeed, and we could certainly continue this discussion for some time yet, particularly on a topic like that. But unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today in this second edition of our ISL Leader Forum series, Navigating New Seas. I'd like to thank our panelists, Judy with us from Australia, Teck from Singapore, and Gareth also joining us from Australia for sharing your experiences and insights with our audience today. And special thanks to our online audience too, of course, for watching and participating in this forum. This live stream will be edited into bite-sized chunks. It'll be available to view on the ISL website. That's www.leadership.ac.nz. In the coming days, it'll also be available as a podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And the ISL Pulse of Leaders in New Zealand and Australia can be also accessed in the Leader Forum section of our homepage. Once again, that's at www.leadership.ac.nz. Now, if you'd like to continue the discussion, which we encourage you to do so, or raise a question you'd like discussed in our upcoming future Leader Forums, please join the dedicated ISL Leader Forum LinkedIn group. You can do that just by searching for ISL Leader Forum in the LinkedIn search bar, and then make sure to select groups, click on the ISL Leader Forum group and request to join. Our next forum will be in a month's time, around the middle of July. I look forward to welcoming you back then for another informative hour of insights and experiences from leaders like you grappling with the challenges of this new business operating environment. I'm Andrew Patterson for ISL.